It's time for the Big Three. Today's topics: fed up. Who are these people? And this week's must-reads. Let's bring in my Big Three panel. MSNBC contributor Goldie Taylor, whose column Breaking Black is featured on The Griot every Monday. Professor of Political Science at Hiram College, Jason Johnson. And MSNBC contributor and former Bush Cheney senior advisor, Robert Traynham. I love this Big Three. You guys are all great. Okay, so I'll go ladies first with Goldie. First to you, the fed up. NBC News helped conduct a focus group of 11 Cincinnati area voters who describe themselves as independents. And here's what they said about Congress and the shutdown earlier this year. Take a listen.
I think they were selfish, not caring about themselves, but hurting the people they're supposed to be in there helping and representing.
I thought it showed a lack of concern by our leaders for the people that they represent. That they had their own agenda, and I don't think they had the people's best interest at heart.
I felt like certain people decided to shut down the government to prove a political point rather than work towards actually making improvements in something. I mean, I have no problem if they disagreed with the Affordable Care Act, but they could have worked to improve it, not shut down the government to prove a point.
You think? Anyway, Goldie, how fed up is middle America with Washington right now?
I think they're damn fed up, and I think they sure ought to be. You know, to find a government that is callous enough to forget about the lives of federal workers and shut down this government, to think about, you know, those in Congress who want to cut off unemployment benefits, those who want to cut SNAP benefits by, you know, millions of dollars. I think those kinds of detachments are the reason why this Congress has an approval rating, you know, in the single digits. I think that's unfortunate.
Robert, what's your reaction to what this focus group said?
Well, it's not surprising, obviously. The latest Gallup poll has Congress at 6%. The latest Gallup poll has the president at roughly about 34–40%, depending on who you ask. And the unfortunate thing about it is that the independent, the vital center, is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller, and the Republican Party is growing in terms of numbers, and the Democratic Party is growing in numbers. And so the question becomes, is how can you govern when the vital center is so very small, when you have a Congress that legitimately so is saying, listen, I'm listening to my constituents here, and my constituents are saying one thing, but the rest of America is saying something different. What I mean by that is that when you ask the Republican Party in the House specifically, are they representing their district? They're saying absolutely. The question becomes is whether or not they can say, you know what, listen, constituency, I know you think this way, but as a federal legislator, I have to go towards the middle. That's the real question, and whether or not they can do it or not.
Can I ask you just real quick? You heard the president say that he believes that, he told this to Chris Matthews, he says, look, there's a lot of Republicans out there who've got to be fed up with what's being brought by the Tea Party. And so do you think that's true, that there are a lot of Republicans that are elected officials, Robert, your party, who say, oh, this is so frustrating because we're being, you know, hampered by the Tea Party?
Absolutely. I think if you were to ask Speaker Boehner off the record, he would say that. If you were to ask some moderate Republicans, whether they're in the House or the Senate, they would say absolutely. I think that's the main reason why you saw a lot of Republicans on the Senate side, Mitch McConnell and some others, that were very frustrated with the Tea Party when Ted Cruz and others shut the government down. In fact, there was one Republican senator who went off the record and said, you know what, they were sold a bunch of snake oil. Right. So, you know, it's not just Republican Party, it's the whole entire country that's frustrated.
Yeah,
here.
so Jason, real quick, the impact of comments like this on politicians, any? I mean, do we see that?
They're not going to pay much attention. And I can tell you this, I'm in the Midwest right now. I'm in Cleveland. This is one of those weird areas where we have seen some economic improvement. You can actually see stimulus money working out here. They're redoing some of the bridges and some of the main highways. But people are frustrated from the lack of leadership. They're frustrated with Obama. They thought he was going to get a lot more done and be able to explain a lot more. And they're frustrated with the far right that seems obsessed with stopping the president rather than fixing problems. So it's a mixture here, and that's the problem.
Okay. I want to play a soundbite from Newt Gingrich, who got, you know, he's really frustrated because he was praising Nelson Mandela on his Facebook page last week, and he got some really nasty comments. Let's play what he said.
I was very surprised by it, and Calista had posted my statement on her Facebook page and was amazed at some of the intensity, some of whom came back 3, 4, and 5 times, repeating how strong, how angry they were.
Who are these people, Robert?
They are a very narrow-minded minority that look at Nelson Mandela's life through the prism of communism. And it's true that that Nelson Mandela did, in fact, reach out to the Communist Party. And it's also true because the Communist Party was the only individuals out there that were looking to help Nelson Mandela. But that was a very narrow-minded piece of history there. Nelson Mandela, when he was freed back in 1991, very quickly dismissed the Communist Party. So it's a very narrow-minded group of individuals out there that are not looking at Nelson Mandela's life and legacy as a whole. He was a great, great, great man, and they refuse to see that.
Goldie, do you get surprised when you hear something like this?
I think it's not surprising to me. I mean, you look at Jesse Helms and people like Strom Thurmond, who back in the day in the mid-'80s were fighting against levying sanctions on South Africa. But it was people like Newt Gingrich, surprisingly, and people like Mitch McConnell, who went against President Reagan to overturn that veto and levy the kinds of sanctions on South Africa that led to the release of Nelson Mandela, that led to the destruction of apartheid, in South Africa. And so I'm not surprised that this brand of conservatism still lives, but I am surprised at how people sort of reconstruct this history. I think I've heard people over the last couple of days compare Reagan to Nelson Mandela. Quizzically, they do this kind of thing, or to sort of compare Obamacare to apartheid. I think that once we get the history right, I think a lot of truth comes out. Yeah,
Jason, you got 15 seconds to add a comment.
It's real simple. They're racist. It's really simple. They're just racist. He's a famous black person who most common sense people on the planet are praising, and people who are racist don't like to see that happen. And we can talk about the political stuff, but there's always going to be that level of hostility. It's embarrassing, and I'm glad that Newt Gingrich and other leaders like Ted Cruz have said, I'm not going to stand for that. A great man is a great man regardless of color.
Yeah. All right, I appreciate you saying that. Disappointing as it is, but probably true. All right, guys, a high-speed train, the Big Three's must-reads, next.